So today we come to the end of the first book of Psalms. Let me show you that in this. So here we see another book of Psalms. Each of the books are set off from the previous one by this praise. Blessed be the Lord, the God of Israel, from everlasting to everlasting. Each book is marked by a closing what's called doxology, a closing praise for the Lord. So this is the last book, last psalm of the first of five books of the Psalms. Obviously, as we look at this, someone has collected these psalms into this book. So elsewhere in the Bible, it says that I think Solomon was the writer of over a thousand psalms. I'll go find that reference for you. But so someone has selected the Psalms, put them together in a particular order, organized them into five different books. And as I said, each has kind of a message. Each book has something that it's contributing to an overall story of the Psalms. Psalm 41 is kind of touching, I think, particularly when we reflect on the experience of Christ through the lens of the psalm. Of course, David was speaking prophetically when he was writing this, didn't really know the full implications of what he was saying at the time. So we'll try to understand what this looked like from David's perspective and from the perspective of those who heard him. Because again, remember, David is writing as king of Israel. One of his roles as king, as that theocratic ruler, that is, that ruler for God, was to teach and train the people in righteousness and godliness. So, what we find in this psalm is a lesson from David that suffering is God's tool to equip us to help others. We find this affirmed in 2 Corinthians 1:4, for example. And in this psalm, what David is doing is he's providing Israel, a church, Israel, an example of how the godly are to respond when suffering comes. And we in the church can learn from what David's taught Israel and then build on that in the progress of Revelation to have a living, breathing example of what this looks like in the Lord Himself. So let's just walk through this, a little bit of an outline here. Verses 1 through 3 says, God blesses the helper of the helpless. He will deliver and protect and preserve them in verses 1 and the first part of 2 here. Blessed is he who considers the helpless, that the Lord will deliver them in the day of trouble, protect them, and he shall be and keep him alive or preserve him. This is the blessing that God's going to help pour out on the helper of the helpless. So if you're, for example, involved in a Stevens ministry in some church, I know that's really popular. This is a blessing for you to deliver and protect and preserve you. Verse 2, it says they will be called blessed upon the earth, or that word there, translated earth, really means land. They will be blessed in the land. And what he's saying here is that by showing compassion for those who need it, God is going to bless them by putting them in the land. He's going to put Israel in their land. This is part of the blessing of obedience to the covenant that's made in Deuteronomy. Deuteronomy chapter 4, verse 1 says this is the condition for Israel to possess the land that God has given them. Protect them from their enemies. At the end, he will not give them over to desires of their enemies. In verse 3, he will restore them to health, keep them from illness, and sustain them and restore them to health. Before we come to verse 4 and meditate on that, let's just go through and say the second section begins in verse 4 and goes through verse 9. And this is I titled it, God Trains the Helper of the Helpless. So the first part was God was the protector. Here, God is the trainer. He trains the helpless, the helper of the helpless. He trains them in verse 4 to confess their sin. He trains them by afflicting them by false friends. He's equipping them, isn't he? He's equipping them to respond when there's sin in someone's life, equipping them to respond when there are false friends that are around him. Here, his enemies are speaking evil against him. Perhaps David learned this on his own deathbed. 2 Samuel chapters 2 and 3, I think, talk about David's death. And look what's going on here. His enemies speak evil against him. They're kind of coming into his death chamber saying, when is he going? And then they see what he's doing and then leave and say, when is he going to die? When will his name perish? Their heart gathers wickedness. And when he goes outside, he tells all the wickedness to everybody. So these are false friends that he's equipping him. Hurt by false accusations in verses 7 to 8. They all hate me who whisper together against me and devise my hurt, saying a wicked thing is poured out upon him. So David is being equipped here to help those who are hurt by false accusation in verses 9 and 10. Particularly poignant here in light of Jesus and his relationship with Judas. Verse 9, even my close friend in whom I trusted, who ate my bread, has lifted up his heel against me. Can't you just sense the heartbreak that's going on there? So again, these are things that are being equipped, that God trains the helper of the helpless by allowing them to go through these things, to confess sin, to know how to respond to false friends and false accusations, and to be even abandoned by the most intimate of our friends. So again, if you're a helper, and I pray that all of you are helpers to someone, or a caregiver, or part of a Stevens ministry in a church, this is God equipping you when you experience these things, that this is God at work equipping you. Verses 10 through 12 then close with this helper of the helpless. What do? You ask God for vindicating grace. You take a long perspective. I know that you are pleased with me because my enemy will not triumph over me. He's taken the long view there. They may be gloating over me now, but ultimately I'll be vindicated. And he closes with a confession of his confidence in God. And then we have this closing doxology that probably added later, that closes out this book. So let's go back to verse 4 and just meditate on this a little bit. Again, David says, as for me, this is what David knows to be true about God and how he's equipped him to seek and help him in his suffering. As for me, he says, be gracious to me. Note, he didn't ask for justice, otherwise he would have received punishment for his sin. He did not ask for mercy in the sense that he would be pardoned from his sin. Rather, what he's asking for is grace here. Grace is God's undeserved favor. This is the privilege of the saved. The unbeliever, the unsaved, can't ask for God's grace. They can ask for it, but they'll receive his judgment in reply. But the believer can ask confidently for God's grace, as David does here. And he asks for him to heal my soul. This is a plea for the restoration of a clean heart and a clean mind. I think as we give care to others, as we reach out to others and try to comfort them in their distress, I think this is the place that we really start. I think this is how we begin as we try to minister to others, is pray for God's grace in their lives and ask for God to heal their soul from however they may have sinned against them. For us as believers, we have privilege of asking God to restore us into his favor. This goes way beyond being forgiven. and extends to God being active in restoring us to that position of blessing, to heal our soul, to do something about that inward man that wanders so far from God from time to time. A position where God is pleased with us and is actively helping us. This is our privilege to pray, and this is our privilege to lead others to pray as well, brothers and sisters. So respond by remembering that God blesses the helper of the helpless. So let's be on the lookout today. Let's bring that blessing down upon ourselves by looking and seeing how we can use what we've learned either today or in the previous days of the Psalms to help others. Let's be a force of helpfulness and grace in our church, in our home, in that circle of friends that God has blessed us with. Let's look for opportunities to be a positive force of grace in their lives as God has been in ours. God bless you.